Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Rotoworld Football Show. I'm Patrick Daugherty, joined today by Mr. Denny Carter and Mr. JP Finlay, who is going to help us end our division preview series with the Colossus of the NFL, the NFC East. We'll be talking about the Commanders with JP. We'll be talking about the New York Giants with the New York Daily News' Pat Leonard. Going to be awesome stuff from both. JP down in Miami, Florida, where he informs us it is not cool. The humidity is perhaps off the charts. JP, how you doing today?
I'm great, fellas. I mean, all things considered, as a guy that works and lives in D.C. year-round, it's pretty darn hot there in August. Yes, so I wasn't expecting it to be cool in Miami in August. It's sweltering, though. You can feel the humidity. Yeah. And I'm holding on to my computer for dear life because it feels like a pretty big thunderstorm's brewing. I don't know if you can see it. The wind's starting to blow, so we'll see how this goes.
Well, the good news is you're not made of metal, so it should be fine, right?
You should be okay. By the way, experiencing that heat, you see why the Dolphins lose anytime the temperature dips below 60 degrees.
Seriously, man, it's hot. And what's crazy is they actually had to not cancel, but they the last period of the Commanders-Dolphins practice, they moved inside, and they wouldn't tell us. They claimed the heat index got above a certain metric. I don't know what that metric was, but I have a feeling if it was just Miami practicing, they wouldn't have moved inside.
I gotcha.
That's you know what, you got to make allowances for us, our soft Northerners. So we cannot deal, we cannot cope. But JP, the season of change for the Commanders continues. They got a new owner, then they got a new coach, then they finally got their new quarterback. For as important as Josh Harris and Dan Quinn are, this project is now about what Jayden Daniels brings to the table. And just what kind of offense, speaking of new, have you seen new offensive coordinator Cliff Kingsbury and company bringing to the table this summer? And is this Daniels dual threat just going to be fully unleashed the way it was at LSU last season?
I think so, honestly. Daniels has looked really good. It was interesting today with the joint practices. There was a former GM kind of just walking around down here that is no longer in football, but I was chatting with him for a bit. He said, man, that Daniels kid looks like the real deal. And that's consistent with everything I've seen. Jayden had a really good day today. A couple of picks, but they were like passes that bounced off his receiver's hands. And I do think he's going to run. I think he's going to run more than folks are expecting. Not all kind of read option. I think they're going to institute some of kind of what Philly does with Jalen Hurts, which has me a little bit nervous because a lot of that Hurts stuff is kind of interior power running that I don't know that Jayden's built for. But I think this attack is going to be really varied. I think Kingsbury has this reputation from his air raid days as a quarterback at Texas Tech. They're going to run a lot of 12 personnel. I think a fair amount of 13. They have weapons, but not all of them are at the wide receiver position. You've got Terry McLaurin, who's clearly established himself. But I think Brian Robinson, Austin Ekeler, Zach Ertz, Ben Sinnott, I think all those guys are going to have very legitimate roles in this offense.
JP, we saw Jayden Daniels used at the goal line as a rusher against the Jets in Washington's first preseason game last week. He scored a touchdown, sort of sauntered in. Is that going to be a regular feature of that red zone offense? Are we going to see a lot of those designed, rushes for Daniels?
Yeah, I mean, that was, he could have handed that off. They did a really good job of selling that fake to Ekeler. Mm-hmm. If you go back and watch it, I mean, both the linebackers kind of crashed down, thought Ekeler had the ball. But, yeah, I mean, I think the red zone is going to be fascinating because I think Jayden's very much a real threat down there. And I think that's a space where Ben Sinnott, the rookie out of K-State, might have a real role because they've got some H-back stuff that they've installed for him, and you see it in short yardage and in red zone, at least in practice during installs. And at least for me as a fantasy guy, like the more chances I know my guy might be on the field close to the goal line, I can't.
So to put a bow,
I think all those guys will have a role though.
To put a bow on the Daniels rushing stuff, you mentioned Jalen Hurts and maybe doing some of that stuff, but maybe not having like the physical presence. Jalen Hurts has, Jayden Daniels has the size. He's 6'4", but yeah, he's not thick like Jalen Hurts. Or at least that he wasn't at LSU. Just what is his physical presence like on the field? Does he look bigger? Does he look the same? Does he look like a guy who's like getting up to NFL strength, or just kind of like the same frame we saw in the SEC?
It looks pretty similar, honestly. It's kind of unique with him because when you look at him, he doesn't look skinny. I cover Emmanuel Forbes. I know what a skinny football player looks like, but with Jayden, he's got a good like trunk, like his legs, and not to sound weird, like his butt seem kind of normal, but he has like kind of his shoulders. Like there's not most quarterbacks are big, broad-shouldered guys, right? And he doesn't have that. There's a slope there, and maybe over time that changes. But I wouldn't want to mess with it too much because he's got a really quick release that I wouldn't want to mess with. So yes, the interior stuff makes me a little bit nervous if that's what they're going to do, like they do with Jalen, who squats 650 or whatever. Yes. I don't think Jayden's squatting close to that.
No, Jalen Hurts puts together 3 or 4 podcasters and then squats them easily. Squatting every single member of the show. You mentioned Austin Ekeler earlier. You know, when he was signed, a lot of people just assumed he would simply slide in as the third down back. I actually went on the record with an unpopular take. Like, I don't know, he has a lot of goal line experience, actually. We've kind of seen that. Denny pointed out to me that we saw some Ekeler red zone snaps in the preseason opener. Do you think, though, is Brian Robinson just going to own the goal line role, or is he not going to own it? Because for fantasy, Brian Robinson needs to own that goal line role. If he doesn't, he's in trouble, even if he's getting like 15 carries. What do you think the Commanders' initial plans are at the goal line? It could be Jayden Daniels, of course, but what do you think they're planning to do with the running backs at the goal line?
It's a great question. I mean, if you want to lean on history and you look at the best year Cliff had in Arizona with James Conner, I think had like 18 touchdowns in 21, but Chase Edmonds was still a threat as kind of the pass catching back. I just think it's going to look different though. I don't expect it to. I think there's just going to be variety. I don't think anybody owns anything. And not to oversimplify that, but I worry I'm getting thrown out of here for the weather. I am getting thrown out of here for the weather. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, guys.
That's all right. We'll talk a lot about the Commanders, and I mean, you've been going above and beyond for us, including risking life and limb.
Yes.
To talk about
I'm sorry, fellas. I think they got good options, but the wide receiver 2 thing, the Jahan thing, that is real. Nothing's set in stone after Terry.
Gotcha.
Well, you literally answered the next question. Thank you so much, JP.
Thanks, JP.
Denny. Jahan Dotson, has it never been more?
Yeah. We have a blurb on it on the site if folks want to check it out about the Commanders actively searching for a number 2 receiver behind Terry McLaurin. And JP Finlay obviously just said that nothing is set beyond Terry McLaurin as the wide receiver 1. And I'm not shocked by this, considering, Dotson really falling off by every metric last year. And honestly, like, I never really got it with Dotson because
didn't make sense. It was bad.
I mean, he seems like a good guy. He ran super hot as a rookie on touchdowns, and not even for the whole season. He ran hot for the first month on touchdowns. And I think folks were trying to say, well, this is normal. This is going to be what he does. It's just score an unsustainable number of touchdowns. And the thing is, no one does that. Even really good receivers don't do that. So I don't see Dotson as being fantasy relevant in 12-team leagues, especially because, look, if you're drafting a pass catcher from a team with a hyper mobile quarterback like Jayden Daniels, that pass catcher has got to be seeing 20+% of the target share, and on this team there's only one guy, and that's Terry McLaurin. Beyond that, I don't have a ton of interest in the receivers, but it is good to hear that like Dotson right now is not going to be a thing in this offense.
So Denny, hear me out. It sounds like what you're saying with Terry McLaurin, who every single year is drafted. First, it was like a low end wide receiver 1. Then it was like a high end wide receiver 2. Then it's kind of like a mid range wide receiver 2. We just kept kind of ever so slightly adjusting expectations down because he never lived up to expectations. Now he's the wide receiver 32 so far this summer. Are you saying that maybe, potentially, possibly, this time it counts?
This time, it might count. It might count this time. I'm not totally sold that this time it counts for Terry McLaurin. I think that he'll be more like a spiky player, like have a big week here or there, because he is actually a really good downfield pass catcher traditionally. It's just that all of the quarterbacks he's played with have been terrible on deep balls. And Jayden Daniels is actually quite good on those downfield throws.
So, let me throw out, I guess, a somewhat obvious comparison. Are we getting DJ Moore with Justin Fields finally this year with Terry McLaurin, maybe? Because that's like the dream outcome for Terry McLaurin, of course. Like gets a real quarterback once type of deal.
I guess I would need to see it to believe it, because the thing with DJ Moore last year in the Chicago offense was that he got a lot of intermediate and underneath stuff to sort of smooth over the weeks where he didn't hit the deep ball, right? McLaurin's never really been used like that, unfortunately. I mean, look, I've drafted McLaurin in hopes that he would, but it's never worked out. And so it would be, look, maybe Cliff Kingsbury does see him in that way. And if so, he's going to be a major value.
I just remembered we're counting on Cliff to like unlock these guys, man. Just never mind. Like,
I know
it's not happening. I mean,
I know. I can't believe he's back. I feel like
I can't either. Back in Thailand.
He left in a not good place with the league.
So, no, he had to go all the way to Southeast Asia.
Yeah, and no one knew where he was for like a year.
No one knew. He didn't want to be found. He's like Jason Bourne, though, except for instead of like being an unstoppable killing machine, he's an offensive, easily stopping machine. And, I'm sorry, I don't know, man. That was terrible.
I will say, Jayden Daniels is like the easiest fantasy pick in recent memory.
I mean, I keep thinking the same thing, and I just wonder, like, are we not giving this enough scrutiny, the Jayden Daniels thing? Because it's Cliff. It's, as you mentioned, a pretty thin skill group. It's one of those skill groups that feels deep at first because you're like, oh, they've used 2 first-round picks on receivers lately. But then, the buzz is, oh, yeah, Jahan Dotson's not good, apparently.
No, he's not.
It's Terry McLaurin, who's always been just a slight underachiever, at least in fantasy. It's kind of like it's a fine backfield, but it's like a very average backfield. We're trying to get excited about Zach Ertz and an H-back at tight end, Ben Sinnott.
Well,
is it really enough weapons? Is it just the legs too big to fail, which apparently are quite literally huge, too big to fail?
Yeah. I know. I mean, I could see Jayden Daniels regularly taking off and running 10 or 12 times a game. And with that sort of speed and elusiveness and what we saw of him in college, I think that could just be out of control. Like for fantasy, he could be a walking, talking cheat code. So I see, I mean, look at Konami code quarterbacks, rushing quarterbacks, mobile guys. They are floor plays first and foremost. Okay. That like they have a much higher floor than the typical drop back pocket passer. But I do think some of these guys obviously have huge ceilings. And I think that Jayden Daniels has a Lamar type ceiling.
Dude, 10 times out of 10, you take Jayden Daniels, dual threat, but shaky supporting cast over Caleb Williams, born passer, amazing supporting cast, and maybe even a guy who might cash in some rushing.
And they are going similar ADP.
They are. They're back to back in the QB ADPs at least. QB 10,
yeah,
QB 11.
I would go with Daniels, but I guess it depends on your league's draft. Like if you're drafting with a bunch of savvy people, they might take Daniels way ahead of ADP.
I don't know any smart people.
I know 4 of them, so I'm good with. This is not to say like I'm out on Caleb Williams. I actually do like Caleb Williams in fantasy, but Jayden Daniels is just too easy.
He is, but I know one smart person. His name's Denny Carter.
No, well, thank you.
Amazing, excellent fantasy analyst. What else were we going to ask JP? I mean, the tight end is honestly. I mean, every year tight end. I feel like tight end is there's a little more depth, like at the higher end of tight end this year. Uh-huh. And then, so usually with tight end, it's like there's 5 elite guys, and there's a lot of really interesting guys between 10 and 20. This year, there's very few interesting guys between 10 and 20. Is kind of my take. But do you think Zach Ertz, Denny, is maybe one of these interesting guys? Because people don't, it's the classic, like people don't want to believe this is what peak tight end PPR scam performance looks like. But might that be the case with Zach Ertz?
Yeah, I think that Ertz would probably start the season as the guy who's running the most routes between him and Ben Sinnott, who is traditionally an H-back in college.
He's an H-back. He'll never make a difference in fantasy.
I'm sort of coming around on him a little bit because his usage against the Jets last week was sort of encouraging. If I could just tell the folks about that real quick.
You can.
He ran 12 routes. He was targeted 3 times, caught all 3 for 57 yards. He was out wide twice. He was in the slot 3 times. I'm sorry, 5 times. 5 out of his 15 routes 5 out of his 12 routes were from the slot. Then he was in line for the rest. I mean, if that's the kind of usage he's going to see, then he's like a real tight end. Now, I think Ertz is a roadblock for him, but he's someone to monitor. Although in 12-team leagues, certainly like 10-team leagues, he's not worth drafting, I don't think.
Denny, at cost, Austin Ekeler, RB42, or Brian Robinson, RB31. Which one are you taking? If you're forced, for some reason, your league specs are that you have to draft one of these running backs.
Yeah. In leagues where you're only allowed to draft one Commander's running back, I would lean toward Robinson. I wrote about Robinson in my recent boring running backs column. But I am not entirely sold, and the way that you're talking about Ekeler, it makes sense to me. And he does have a lot of experience with plunging into the end zone. So I could end up looking rather silly on this Washington backfield.
Yeah, maybe the correct answer is just none of them. But.
Well, that, and that is, part of the way I approach offenses, NFL offenses, is if it's quarterbacked by a guy who runs a lot, then I'm not super interested in the running backs. Like, that's why I've never been into Eagles running backs, because Jalen Hurts is simply just going to do it all.
We'll see. That's one thing, there's this time of year, we just need data so bad so we can stop having the same arguments over and over again. The Eagles and the fate of the tush push is one I'm very, very interested in.
I know.
I think their initial plan is, of course, we're still doing the tush push. And then they see a non-Jason Kelsey center one time in a regular season NFL game. Like if they maintain the courage of their tush push convictions.
Who knows? The new offensive coordinator, Kellen Moore, he could see that as a relic of the past administration and say, this is not my thing. We're not doing it.
We're not doing it. One thing we are doing really quickly is taking a short break. We'll be right back after this. The Rotoworld Draft Guide is here for you during the peak of draft season, and this year it has added features available exclusively through a new partnership with Matthew Berry's Fantasy Life. Get a Fantasy Life Plus subscription and receive the Rotoworld Draft Guide to help you crush your competition. Crush them. Use promo code ROTO10 for 10% off and unlock extensive fantasy, DFS, and betting tools now. Go to NBCSports.com/fantasylife to learn more. We'd be remiss if we did not mention we're doing several mock drafts with several Fantasy Life people over the next week. Denny Carter and I, and one on Friday with Mr. Ian Harditz and Mr. Andy Behrens from Yahoo. We're going to be drafting half PPR teams, and it's going to be really good stuff. We have our big official PPR mock next Tuesday. So we're going to have a lot of good stuff. We have a lot of continued good stuff for you right now, and that is Mr. Pat Leonard from the New York Daily News, who's been on this preview show before and really brought the smoke for us, I remember. Not to put pressure on you, Pat. So first off, Pat, you're right in the thick of it. Danny and I just get to sit at home in our easy chairs and podcast. You actually have to go watch football practice and write articles and do all sorts of things. And we might be having some technical difficulties with Pat, by the way. Pat, can you hear us? Pat, while we're figuring out if Pat can hear us, I'm just going to keep talking about the things Pat Leonard might be doing. He's got they actually make beat writers play football now, which
he's grinding.
He's the center for the New York Giants,
right? And no one knows that, and they won't report that. But
they won't report that. Yeah, he's got that's why he's typing with a club on his hand. He got injured playing center, and I just don't really think. I think it's a relic of the past. Like back in the 50s and 60s, beat writers could easily play NFL football at the highest level. I mean, come on, these guys. Off-season jobs and stuff. They weren't real athletes like they are today.
I've always been a writer for a living, and I once broke my hand, Pat, in softball, and had to wear a cast. I had to type with one hand. I learned how to type with one hand, and that really stunk. That was not a fun time for me.
I almost broke my finger playing softball when, as the athletic genius that I am, I was playing center field, so I was always fast. So I got put in the outfield all the time, but wasn't the best at judging fly ball trajectories, but my speed. So if the regular center fielder's out there, whatever, just put Pat in center field. You sure about that? And, I was in center field, and someone hit a rocket at me, an absolute rocket. And I managed to judge it correctly. I didn't have to move, but it was coming at me. And in the confusion, I somehow put my hand in front of my glove, and it just
obliterated my right hand.
Yes.
No, Pat, you got to use the glove.
That's what everyone told me. I was like, what's this thing for on my hand? And so you can catch the ball.
Yeah. Oh, when I was growing up, they coaches always say, got to catch it with two hands, man. Come on, but you got to use both hands. I'm not doing that. First of all, Deion Sanders doesn't do that in the outfield. I'm not reading all that. I'm putting my right hand behind my back and I'm catching it with my left hand because I don't want to break my fingers. That's what I don't want.
The thing was, I was using two hands, Denny.
I know. You shouldn't have been. That's what I'm saying. That's what I always told the coaches. Why do I want to use two hands? That doesn't make any sense.
But ever since then, my right index finger has been mysteriously bigger than my left index finger.
Oh, really?
It's really weird. Yeah.
Can I tell you how I broke my hand?
No. Yes. Obviously.
God, I really don't want to, but I will. I feel like I owe it to the listeners.
You do.
I got caught in a rundown between first and second base, and I went back and forth and back and forth, and I got tagged out, and I went back to the bench, and I punched the fence. And I broke my hand. Yeah, you never ever
do that. You want to know how the only time in my life I broke my hand? This is also a true story. I was about 13 or 14 years old, and I went. So my brother's 2 years younger than me, so he's not like a little kid. I went to punch him. I went to like bring my fist down. I don't know what part of his body I was even trying to hit. I was trying to do like a fist slam on him, and he moved, and my hand hit directly on his knee. And I broke my hand.
Well, that's what you get, first of all.
It is what you get.
And also, are you the Incredible Hulk? What do
you... I don't know why. I don't remember. Like that. That's not how I normally punched. Listen, when I normally punched my brother, it was normal. Like, thankfully, we did not fight very much. You said you owed it to the listeners, by the way, the story. You know what you really owe the listeners, Denny? You got to release the tapes of the grill. You got to release the
tapes of the grill. I know. I already showed everybody the grill. I had a video. I showed. If folks want to check it out, it's on the X platform, formerly known as Twitter.
It's time. The tapes must be released. The tapes must be released, Denny. There's no hiding. There's no more hiding.
Can I tell you that someone actually found the grill on the Home Depot website and sent it to me? It was like, I know it's this one, and they were right. And I was like, I was kind of weirded out. I was like, God, man. The internet
was going to happen. Of course, they were going to do that.
Man, people love their Google.
They do. By the way, I'm sorry I did that. That was me. That was my burner.
That was you. That was your burner. Oh man,
grill stalking you.
I thought I knew all your burners. Well, we're still trying to connect with Pat Leonard here. We're having some technical issues. We want to talk about the Giants very much. We
do. We're looking into talking about the Giants very powerfully.
Very powerfully.
But I mean, come on, man. Listen, like we're saving $100 for that grill, Denny. You could. Was it really? No. Was it really worth $100? Like, come on.
I saved like $300 or $400. Okay, so and also I haven't used it since I got it.
That's not surprising, but was it really worth $300 or $400? Listen, $300 or $400, you can do a lot with that money. But it's like that. If you're gonna make the purchase, just make the right purchase. Just pay what it actually takes. Don't get the world's smallest grill.
Did you collaborate with my wife on these talking points because she had the same points? It's curious that you guys are talking in the same way.
Well, I grew up in a family. This is how we operated. It's like, Dad, can we get a slightly better phone? And so this phone that I'm looking at, I can tell is going to break within 1 month. For $10 more, can we get a slightly better phone? And the answer was like, oh no. And then it would break, and it ended up costing more money in the long run because you had to replace it faster.
It was that way for printers with us. Our printer was the worst possible printer growing up. And back in the day, you had to print stuff out. You had to print out your papers for school. You had to print stuff. And it didn't quite work ever. And
did you know that there's still not one working printer in the United States? There's no printer that actually works properly.
I've never seen one work.
I've never seen one work. I've never seen the Dallas Cowboys not be the center of conversation as we wait for Mr. Pat Leonard. Denny, with the Cowboys, the concern I have is when I look at the team, the skill core is not what it once was. It's not bad. You can't have a bad skill core when you have CeeDee Lamb. Although CeeDee Lamb, it's August 15th, and as you have to practice, of course, you can't have a bad skill core when you have CeeDee Lamb. Jake Ferguson is an okay number 2. He's not a good number 2. Jake Ferguson should be a really good third or fourth option, but he's the Cowboys' second option right now. I just worry about, will the pass volume not be what we're used to seeing with the Cowboys? They fired Kellen Moore once, and Mike McCarthy was playing Madden last year. Just pass. But is the skill core good enough to can still sustain that? We know the backfield is not going to be the answer either. But I'm just worried about, are we going to get a letdown with the Cowboys passing attack?
I'm not expecting one, honestly. Dak Prescott in the seasons where he hasn't been injured has been a top 8 fantasy quarterback every single time. And rarely has that come with like unsustainable touchdown production. It is mostly based on volume. Last year, the Cowboys were 4th in pass rate over expected. They were 3% above their expected pass rate. I will say that their overall pass rate at 61% ranked 13th in the league. So it's not, on the surface, they weren't super pass heavy.
It wasn't what it appeared.
But they were over expected, and I think that that's important. I actually think that, because they tried to make Tony Pollard a thing very badly last year. They really wanted him to work. Every week they tried. They ran it in some situations where I think that they probably regret it in hindsight. I think that they probably will just give up because they have the worst running back room in the NFL right now. And I could see them being even more pass heavy. Now, is that necessarily good for Dak Prescott? Maybe not, but I think it's real good for guys like Ferguson and Brandin Cooks.
Denny, as we speculated on the latest Galaxy Brains, which you can check out at rotoworld.com, NBCsports.com. Dak, though, he's only allowed 1 interception this entire season.
Yes, we after last year's meltdown.
It's after that, so check out the latest Galaxy Brains. But now I do worry that that is my big fear, that if they pass at the rate they did last year, even if it was only the 13th highest, it was deceptively low. Like, is that just going to equal a bunch of turnovers because they just don't have especially now CeeDee, man. It's how many times do you see the holdout seasons just go wrong? It's almost uncanny. Like, it doesn't make sense. It just seems like it goes wrong every single time.
No, I hear you, and this is all predicated on him returning and being ready for week 1. Like without that, everything changes in this offense. I think Prescott becomes probably not startable in 12-team leagues without CeeDee Lamb. I think Brandin Cooks becomes very interesting. Ferguson, probably like a top 7 tight end, something like that, maybe even better, depending on how you value him. But yeah, I mean, you look at the interception rate for Dak, and besides 2022, where he threw 15 interceptions, that was a 4% interception rate, which is very high. Everything else is very standard. 1.8% in 2020, 1.8% the following year, and then last year 1.4% interception rate. So he actually, I think that Dak Prescott is just vastly underrated in many ways.
He is. We'll see if Pat Leonard agrees with that. Mr. Pat Leonard is now back with us. So we have time later in the show. We'll get to Ezekiel Elliott, as we must do every show. Pat, for some reason, we talk about Ezekiel Elliott every single podcast still, even though it's the year 2024. And Pat, first, we ask people usually to plug what they're doing at the end, but just tell us off the jump what folks should be checking out from you this summer. Your amazing follow on Twitter /X is now Denny insists on calling it. And just where can we find your work, and what are you working on right now?
Appreciate that, Patrick. Yeah, we're doing the at the New York Daily News, of course, covering the Giants and the NFL, but really putting a lot into the Talking Ball with Pat Leonard podcast on the Believe Network. I have a YouTube channel. It's at PL, my initials, on NFL. A lot of special guests, having Allen Robinson, Giants wide receiver, actually on the podcast later today. But go around the league and do live chats with Giants fans, actually from the press box after every Giants game. So after the Texans game on Saturday, I'll be in the locker room, and then I come back up to the press box and I go live with fans on YouTube. So just bringing the news and information right to everybody. What do they want to know for fantasy, injuries? What are guys saying in the locker room? I found people really respond to it, it seems.
That's fun. You're going a lot above and beyond what we do, where we just turn on the podcast like, should we just talk about Ezekiel Elliott again today? and then Denny says yes, and we do that. But
20 minutes on Zeke.
No one covers the Giants.
Nothing wrong with that.
No one covers the Giants better than Pat. And Pat's funny you mentioned Allen Robinson, because for the Giants skill core to be even remotely competitive, they're going to need someone surprising to step up. Expectations not very high for a guy like Allen Robinson this year, because when the average fantasy player especially looks at the Giants roster, they see one of the least talented receiver groups in the league, one of the least talented skill cores in the league. That includes, a quarterback where Daniel Jones could be entering a lame duck season, coming off his torn ACL, headed into the final guaranteed year of his contract. At first, is that an accurate assessment of what is going on with Daniel Jones, or is that more just like a fantasy guy outside the building assessment? And just how has Daniel Jones looked this summer, coming back from the first really major injury of his career?
No, that's an accurate assessment of where Daniel is. If he has a big year, he'll validate that they paid him and he'll be their franchise quarterback. And they finally, as they hope, they believe, they think, a number one wide receiver in Malik Nabers, something he's never truly had. Like, I know Daniel Jones is kind of interested that he just missed Odell Beckham Jr. when he came in to the Giants organization and he never got to play with number 13. So now he has Nabers who's wearing 9 at the moment. But you're absolutely right. I mean, they paid him. John Mara says he still believes in him, but this offense has shifted now, right? Saquon Barkley's gone. He's with the Philadelphia Eagles. Instead of a running back being your major weapon, you now have Nabers, but also a bunch of receivers. Brian Daboll getting to more of that pass heavy, everything on the quarterback's shoulders offense that he ran in Buffalo. Now, no, I don't think anybody thinks Daniel Jones is suddenly going to become Josh Allen, but we were just talking to Daniel Jones today at practice, and I asked him, Daniel, without a running back as the focal point and with a receiver now out there, how different is this offense going to look? And he actually said, we're still learning what we're going to major in. So they're still kind of learning on the fly what will work for them, what won't. But I can tell you this, everything's going to fall on him. His legs, his arm, he looks good. I think the most encouraging thing about camp, outside of Nabers looking pretty explosive, is that Daniel Jones's knee off the torn ACL and his neck off the 2 injuries the last 2 years, those things went from talking points all offseason to non-issues once they got on the field. So that's really the best the Giants can hope for right now, is that he's healthy and ready to roll into this Houston preseason, second preseason game.
Pat, one thing about Daniel Jones that made him so interesting for fantasy purposes at the end of the 2022 season and into the postseason was his rushing. He suddenly we started to see him run 7, 8, 9, sometimes double-digit attempts per game. And some of those were even design runs. They weren't just him being flushed out of the pocket. I know, he's coming back from injury. Are we eventually going to see that again? Or was that sort of fluky usage at the end of the 2022 season?
No, that's a spot on question, Denny, because to be honest, I was just watching practice the other day saying to a couple other observers, they want to push the ball down the field more. They're emphasizing, I was talking to Jalen Hyatt about this. It's a huge emphasis from Daboll to the team that they need to create these explosives, and they feel like they have the receivers and the quarterback to do it. The problem is when I've watched a lot of their practices, it feels like some of their best plays still are, it's either those underneath catch and run routes to a Nabers or a Wan'Dale Robinson, or it's using Daniel Jones's mobility, whether it's him running or whether it's getting him on the move and giving him that option to throw a run. The negative of maybe trying to run that back using his legs a lot is that it did help that teams had to focus on Saquon. Like you would talk to teams preparing for or after the games, they would play the Giants.
Right.
Even if you don't love Saquon and you don't think he's a Christian McCaffrey type player, they were still keying on him and Daniel was working off that. Now you don't have that. And frankly, some of those design runs that worked in 2022, the Giants brought them out last year and teams were ready for them. Okay. So I think it's going to be more of like a tuck and run off a pass play than design runs, but not as explosive maybe as they're looking for.
Okay. Yeah, and no offense to Devin Singletary, he's probably not going to be scaring the defense the way Saquon Barkley did, so that could be another problem.
I love to tell people this. People say Devin Singletary, they'll be fine in the run game, and I say you realize the last time Devin Singletary was on a Brian Daboll offense, he never ran the ball, like ever in Buffalo.
That's a very, very good point. We'll ask about Devin Singletary in just a second, but the receiver core, there's not a lot of discussion with Malik Nabers. I mean, he's just going to get the ball a ton. He's one of the best young receiver prospects in a long time. There is a lot of discussion with the guys behind him. And by the way, of course, there's always going to be a discussion if a rookie will actually produce. But you mentioned them needing to get the ball down the field more. Daniel Jones has been a weird player in that he doesn't throw down the field much, but when he does, he's always graded out really well. Like the nerdy websites, Denny and I agreed. Like he always has a good deep passer rate on Pro Football Focus. And someone like Jalen Hyatt would be a great place to start there. I mean, do you think, will there actually be like an effort to get guys like Jalen Hyatt more involved, or is Danny just maybe too who he is at this point to really change the way he attacks down the field?
No, you're right. He throws a good deep ball. Daniel's problem is if the play is there and the protection is there, he'll let it go. It'll look as nice as any other quarterback's deep ball. The problem is if the play isn't perfect and he has to hitch and move and then make that throw, right? Like it has to be all scripted. And listen, frankly, a lot of quarterbacks are that way in the league. Yes, they want to do that. Yes, they've emphasized it. They've done a lot of it in camp. One interesting thing about Jalen Hyatt is he has not, like Darius Slayton at certain points here looked like a guy who could be traded, and that could still come to pass depending on how this season goes. He even wanted a trade at one point in the spring.
I feel like as he should. He's always been underutilized in this fantasy guy's opinion. But,
no doubt. But here's the interesting part. The Giants, as Hyatt being a draft pick, a former Biletnikoff award winner with Tennessee in college, they would love, obviously, for him to just show he can grab that other receiver spot, and maybe a player like Slayton becomes more expendable and an asset, but he hasn't done that. And he was telling me he needs to be more consistent in the all-around game. So coaches want to see that if it's a play where he's required to block, if he's running underneath, he's going to have good hands. He's going to take that hit to make a play. Now, he has done that at times, going back to his rookie year. He made a big catch in Buffalo on a 4th down, took a massive hit over the middle, caught a pass from Tyrod Taylor. So he has done it, but he needs to prove it to them over and over again. And I guess the best way I'm getting to is Hyatt's not going to be on the field all the time because Slayton is a more well-rounded and a valuable receiver on this offense still. And he has the most chemistry with Daniel Jones than any of this group. He can go deep too, but that's one thing that to watch from a fantasy perspective too on offense is, can Hyatt earn more snaps and be more reliable so that they can take more shots to probably the fastest weapon on their team?
So yeah, just 2-part follow-up then on the receivers. Is first up, is there even a second Giants receiver worth drafting in fantasy? And kind of dovetails with, like, is there a legit number 2 receiver, or is it just going to depend on the day? Is it going to depend on the package when it comes to guys like Wandale, Darius Slayton, and Jalen Hyatt?
Wandale Robinson in a PPR format is what I would say. He gets the ball the most, even compared to Nabers sometimes, because there's so much underneath that Daboll does in this offense. Now, I wouldn't, from a yards perspective or even a touchdowns perspective, I wouldn't go there. But I would say he would be, draftable in a PPR format.
Sounds like, just getting back to getting to the backfield here for the Giants, sounds like you're not super high on Devin Singletary. You mentioned his work with Daboll. I mentioned in a column recently that Daboll has said that Singletary knows our system in and out. And, coaches, I think, value that sort of thing. Back in 2021 in Buffalo, with Daboll was with Buffalo in 2021.
He was. Okay. That was his final
season.
season.
Singletary had 870 yards and seven touchdowns. Most of that came at the end of the season. Is he the locked-in running back one here, or is there going to be something of a timeshare?
He is their top back, and I like him as a player. I'm just skeptical how much they will actually run the ball. And also Tyrone Tracy Jr., who I know he's hurt right now, but he was taking a bulk of short yardage work, and for good reason. I mean, he has some build to him. Yeah, he was packing a punch. But I think Singletary is more of a really good complement in a system, even if he is the top guy, then, this is a bell cow. I can count on him every week to produce. I will say, I think they'll use him as a receiver out of the backfield as well as, their primary runner. But right now they're giving Eric Gray a lot of run, who's also a draft pick. Tyrone Tracy, a draft pick that they like. I think there's a priority on trying to, if those young guys play, continue to get them on the field. So, I would be skeptical of treating Singletary like a true number 1 from a fantasy perspective, but I think he's a good player. I just don't trust the scheme. And let's just be honest. Are they going to have the lead in games? Right. That's the big thing.
Yeah. So, we do look at, which teams will be in position to run the ball late in the game. And the Giants don't profile as one of those teams.
They don't, but it's still, so they could be like strange situations, like a 2-minute back or like a hurry up offense back if they're playing from behind. And do you think though? So I'm getting lost in the weeds here, saying there might be other backs who get on the back. I can't speak behind Mr. Devin Singletary. You mentioned the injury to Tyrone Tracy. You mentioned that Eric Gray is also a product of this front office and like the newest regime for the Giants. Is this just still a battle royale? Like, are we not going to know to week 1 who the actual backup is? How much does the Tyrone Tracy injury, even though it's minor, change the calculus there? How do you think things were trending before he was hurt?
Yeah. Well, they just signed Josh Kelly too from the Chargers. I think Tracy's injury is the reason why. I don't know exactly where he's going to fit in. He was running essentially as their 2A back today in his first practice with the team. So
It's not a great
looks like
sign.
they're going to try to get him right onto the field. Dante Turbo Miller, an undrafted rookie, actually was having the most consistent start to finish camp at first. He has explosion and he looks good. Could be, though, the type of young player who's more of a developmental guy they're high on rather than factoring in a big way. That's kind of the feel I got talking to Dable about him. I think Tracy was profiling as the clear 1B back to Singletary's 1A before the injury. And of course, it looks like it's just an ankle sprain. He was actually standing on the field today, kind of doing ladder work on the side with trainers, which is remarkable considering what it looked like.
Yeah.
But I think that without him healthy, that opens the door here for Eric Gray. That opens the door for him to build on what he did in that first game. But the reality is, to be honest with you guys, I think a healthy Tracy is the clear 2. And so when he's healthy, that's where I see it.
So I think we all have a little Singletary skepticism. And even if he did open the door for Eric Gray, would you say Tyrone Tracy may be worth a late round flyer, or just are there more profitable offenses to look into, basically?
Yeah, at that stage, I'd be looking at a high scoring offense as backup rather than the Giants. But like I said, goal line work, short yardage work. So, that could be the asterisk there.
Denny, do you have a follow-up there?
No. I was going to say that the injury to Tracy looked awful. A cart, an air cast. We were thinking that it was a very long-term situation, and it turns out it was a low ankle sprain.
Yeah. They sent him to the hospital of special surgery.
Oh, really?
I mean, I think some fans on Twitter felt like they were misled, and we were like, everything pointed to something that looked really scary for the guy.
Yeah.
But obviously we're relieved. I mean, John Michael Schmitz was kind of had his arm around Tracy today. You could tell, you couldn't hear, but you could tell by their body language. He was saying, man, I thought it was worse than that. It's good to see you. So
yeah. It's the worst low ankle sprain in history. It is. That sounds terrible.
It's good to see Tyrone standing on the field. It's really good to see you, Pat. Thank you so much for taking the time for working through our technical difficulties. We really appreciate that. And awesome stuff. And tell the people again one more time about the podcast and where they can find you on Twitter.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, guys, really, for being here. P Leonard NYDN on Twitter or X. And then the Talking Ball with Pat Leonard podcast, that's on YouTube. PL, my initials, PL on NFL. And we do Talking Ball with podcast with special guests throughout the week, and then Talking Ball live Mondays and Thursdays, 9 p.m. Eastern, and after every Giants game from the press box. So thank you.
Really good stuff. Pat, thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
You got it. Take care.
Thank you to our listeners for taking the time to join us and for listening to this promo. We'll be right back after this. Fantasy football season just got better, $1 million better. Create or join a private Yahoo Fantasy League and enter the $1 million NBC sweepstakes. Plus, earn extra entries to win when players on your fantasy roster score a touchdown during an opening weekend game on NBC or Peacock. Download the redesigned Yahoo Fantasy app or go to NBCSports.com/fantasymillion to learn more. Yeah, I've never come more out of my shoes than trying to get through a Devin Singletary question there.
I was wondering if you were okay medically.
Nope, I wasn't actually. It was a stress reaction to seeing I know people are tired of me talking about. I saw the bank exam.
I did not like what he had to say about Devin Singletary. I'll be honest.
Bad. It's over.
It feels over. Yeah.
Could it be over if it never really started though?
I mean, in my head, it started.
And also though, if Tyrone Tracy was kind of like trying to earn early down work before even a minor injury, maybe re-solidifies Devin Singletary there. I still like Devin Singletary as like a freebie touches-based RB3.
I mean, I was big. I said, Pat, Mr. Leonard, listen, he knows the system.
It was a little unbecoming when you started crying.
And by the way, thank you to producer Adam for editing out my crying.
Your sobs.
Yeah, my sobbing. Are we going to talk about the Eagles? We're talking about the Eagles?
I know the Eagles. I don't know. Do you have anything more you need to say on the Cowboys? Like so much Zeke propaganda coming.
No, I mean, look, if you want to know about
the ministry of Zeke,
literally just go back to any podcast we've done over the past 3 weeks. I mean, I think he'll enter the season as the RB1. I'm going to be very interested in seeing who's running the routes in what I believe will be a very pass-heavy offense in Dallas. And if it's Zeke, I will be vindicated, and everybody will owe me an apology, both on this show and on the X platform. But if it's Dowdle, if it's Rico Dowdle, then I'm going to have to move. You know,
I hear they speak Bank Examiner in Maryland too. So.
I'm going to have to leave to a country that I will not name because I'll be scared. But I mean, it's a big prize. Look, we talked about it on the recent show. Tony Pollard ran the 4th most pass routes among running backs last year. That's just so valuable. He was 3rd in touches inside the 10. So, you know, lots of high value touches and a very good offense here.
Speaking of valuable, the Canadian pine that your deck is made out of, so you can still sell half your deck probably and come out ahead, even if it's not Zeke. Really quick before we get to the Eagles, I mean, is there a 3rd Cowboys pass catcher to care about? Like some people are trying to get back on Brandin Cooks still in the Cowboys.
Yeah, no, Cooks is the wide receiver too, like very clearly. And I know he's maybe washed a little bit, and I know that he's never really been that great. But
that he disappointed everyone last year.
Did he disappoint? Because
think
he exceeded his ADP.
What? No,
I mean,
he was going to like a low end
40.
No, like a low end wide receiver 3, and he had like 600 yards. It's not going to cut it. I mean, he did score a lot of touchdowns.
I don't know. There's no way for us to know. But
so he probably did get in. He probably did exceed ADP. He's the classic. Oh wow, don't overdo it. Drafted as a wide receiver 40 and you're wide receiver 38. Thanks, man.
Yeah, well, that's what it is, right? With a player like Cooks, if you draft him a wide receiver 40, he's gonna be wide receiver 37 at the end of the season, and that comes with a 3 touchdown game. There you go.
So there you have it on the Dallas Cowboys. I don't know, man. I think it's a pretty bad sign that we don't have anyone to talk about with the Cowboys. Like, all the Cowboys' energy is spent talking about Zeke. Like, this offense could be one of the biggest disappointments in fantasy football this year, I think. Not that I'm breaking like new ground here. I mean, people are concerned about the lack of weapons.
Look, just from a volume standpoint, I do think that Jake Ferguson is probably being undervalued. I think that his path to a top 3 PPR season, and it'll be scammy. Don't get me wrong. You know, he's not going to be busting it down the seam for 50 yards. Okay. Like he's going to be catching and immediately falling down, and that's okay. I can work with that. Right. But he can get to a top 3 season if the volume is there.
He can. One fear with Jake Ferguson is it's a little easier to game plan for a guy. Like it's not good for Jake Ferguson. The defenses can like devote resources to him.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Or he's like a top 2 weapon. Like that's not good. You want Jake Ferguson to be the guy that is kind of just getting the advantageous matchups because they have to worry so much about the receivers or the running game, and opposing teams do not have to do that right now for the Cowboys. And Jake Ferguson, I feel like could really use like a Brandin Cooks pseudo renaissance type season, to take some of the pressure off him. But
I did just real quick wanted to mention that the part of the reason I think that the Cowboys will pass more this year is because they'll have less positive game script. The first half of last year, they had all the positive game script because their defense was out of control.
62-0 at the halftime of every game.
Right. Like 4, 5, 6 sacks in the first half. You had pick sixes every week, it seemed like. So the defense was doing a lot of work to put the offense in a good spot. But then when that defense started to come apart, and it is a volatile defense, it is a defense that's based on like inherently like high variance statistics like interceptions. When that came apart, the Cowboys really did have to drop back more than they would like. But for fantasy, we like that. It's good.
When you were talking, all I could think was 19 Dak Prescott interceptions this year.
Well, that would be catastrophic.
It would be. I think it's going to happen too. This Cowboys setup is. I mean, the offensive line too it could be okay, but I don't know. This feels like kind of a crumbling edifice to me. The Dallas Cowboys.
Right. I could see that. Yeah, I think that maybe it started with that loss to the Packers.
It did. We got a preview of their future. Yes, a little bit. And they'll start 7-0, and it's fine. But one reason, I don't know. This is a weird division. They've got major question marks, very, very much, including the Philadelphia Eagles, who were the defending NFC champions last season. They're absolutely rolling. They were 11-1. Then it was like they just forgot how to play offense the final 6 weeks of the season, and were seriously almost unwatchable at times, very much unwatchable against the Bucs in the playoffs. They totally lost their offensive identity. It's no surprising they've made a change at offensive coordinator. Kellen Moore is the guy who was chased out of Dallas. Didn't have really a ton of success with the Chargers. Kellen Moore was not the Chargers' primary problem last year, but a guy whose stock was really rising 2 years ago is now kind of like a question mark offensive coordinator, Denny. But what do you think the Kellen Moore effect is going to be on this Eagles offense?
All right. So here's what we have here in Philadelphia. We have Kellen Moore, who's going to – apparently it's going to be his offense. There was some talk about we're going to meld Sirianni's offense into Kellen Moore's, which sounds like you're on mute.
Yeah, no, I was just saying no. I was just
which sounds like an awful idea. It sounds like that, but I think that it's going to be Moore's thing, and I think that can be at least interesting because the Eagles were near the bottom of the league in a few critical sort of innovative categories, like motion, preset motion, and then you have play action as well. Right. So
play action, not exactly innovative, but is more featured than ever.
Well, what I'm saying is like teams that are hyper EPA goes burr teams.
Yes.
They're using a lot of play action and a lot of motion. Right. And the Eagles were not doing that at all last year. Even when they started to struggle, they still didn't do it because that just wasn't part of their offense. It made them very predictable, very stale. I think they'll get away from that this year. And PPR scoring and per route fantasy value goes up with more usage, with more pre-snap motion and on plays with play action. So we're going to get more of that, and I think that it should change the way we value AJ Brown and Devontae Smith. I hope I'm not completely alone here, but I feel like you could take AJ Brown above some guys he's going after. Like, I know, look, Jamar Chase, he's on the Rotoworld football magazine cover, and I respect the hell out of that cover. And
you don't. All you did was trample on it. You brought bad luck to the cover last year.
No, it was me.
You were not in on Tony Pollard, and you smirched our cover.
Right. It wasn't that Tony Pollard suffered a horrific leg injury the year before.
No.
But I'm okay with taking Brown over Chase. I said it. I had to get it out. It's okay to take AJ Brown over Jamar Chase.
I wouldn't say that. Especially since all they're doing now is hyping Devontae Smith. I feel like we're going to get a big narrative push for week one. Like, listen, is Devontae Smith the real Eagles' number one receiver?
I know. And it never happens.
No, it never does. It never will.
No, even AJ Brown's always like, no, he's the number one. I don't really know what AJ Brown's doing there. AJ Brown is a very typical, like, the enemy speaks kindly receiver.
Some would say the poster boy.
Yeah, but some reason he's constantly pointing to his teammate and saying, no, he's way better than me.
No, that's like the speaks kindly thing, even because honest, for all we know, he might be thinking, well, Devontae thinks he's better than me. So yeah, Devontae's better. Devontae's the number one. No, you're right. Devontae is the number one.
Put it in the paper.
He's just seething on the inside.
Put it in the paper that Devontae's better than me and that I'm not mad.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, don't put any stock into that. He doesn't.
Yeah, but so I really do think that both of those guys are being underdrafted. It's strange to say that about AJ Brown, but I do think that. And also Dallas Goedert is going to benefit. I think that we're going to see him run more slot routes. Okay. I think this team will play faster if it is a typical Kellen Moore offense, it's going to play faster than the Nick Sirianni offense of last year. Right. So that boosts plays per game, more routes for Goedert. So I think that Goedert is also being overlooked in the tight end landscape.
I mean, it's the tight end 12. Fantasy managers are kind of saying it's Jover for Goedert, which is a bit surprising. It's still a very narrow offense. You have rookie Johnny Wilson getting some hype, but as good as AJ Brown and Devontae Smith are, you need a third weapon. Dallas Goedert is clearly that third weapon, but I don't know if fantasy managers are finally spooked by all the injuries. The guy hasn't appeared in more than 15 games since 2018. Dallas Goedert, that's a big problem. He was 14 last year, missed 3. But so I was wondering, what were the reasons? Is it just the injuries and people getting burned by Dallas Goedert? Because I have not understood why he's like the tight end 12 this summer.
I think that, injuries for sure. I also think that, you look and say, well, this is going to be a run heavy team like they have been during the Jalen Hurts era. And I don't think that's quite right. If I could illustrate that with some numbers here, some nerdy numbers, if I can. So under Kellen Moore, the Chargers, and they were not good under Kellen Moore, but the Chargers were 5th in drop back rate over expected. In 2023, the Eagles were 20th in that metric. I'm not saying that a Jalen Hurts offense is going to be top 5 in drop back rate over expected, but I think that they could be top 10. And
I don't know if that would even be good.
Well, I don't care about
asking
real
a lot
purposes.
of Jalen Hurts. That would be asking a lot of Jalen Hurts.
I mean, I don't care if the Eagles don't win a game this year. I just want them to go burr. I just want them to score fantasy points. So
when I think of an ultimate, not a real offense, I think of the 2023 Chargers. Like, it was the most Mickey Mouse, like no philosophy behind the attack whatsoever. It was like a Madden player adrift at sea. And I'm really, really hoping that's what Kellen Moore does not bring.
I know. I know. I've spent 2 years saying Kellen Moore is a fraud, and now I'm saying, oh well, you gotta love the Eagles.
You do. You do. You do. You gotta love Saquon Barkley, Denny? The final question of the show. Like, kind of a widely panned pick all summer. Like, he's the classic. I don't really understand how he's the RB6 because it's just become like every like fantasy experts. I mean, like, oh, Saquon Barkley's an easy fade. He's the RB6. And I completely agree that he is.
I mean,
do you agree?
In PPR, I'm looking at Fantasy Pros ADP, and in PPR, Saquon Barkley is going as the RB4 behind only CMC, Breece Hall, and Bijan Robinson. So
that's a tough scene.
That seems a little nuts to me.
It's awful.
I mean, look, I'm looking down the board. Here are guys who could easily outscore Saquon Barkley. Pacheco, Devon Achane, even a guy like Joe Mixon with enough touchdown production. Ken Walker could outscore Saquon pretty easily. So I think he's being drafted at his absolute ceiling, and I think that people just don't want to come to grips with the fact that the running back spot in a Jalen Hurts offense really stinks. It's just not a good spot.
He's being drafted as if the tush push is over. That is what Saquon Barkley is being
that's a good point.
As. And like, if you're taking him as the RB4 or even the RB6 an underdog, I feel like you need the tush push to be over. Because Saquon Barkley's passing efficiency has not been very good for several years running. He will hopefully have the chance to hit more home runs this year. I was truthing the Cowboys. I really do worry about this entire Eagles offensive operation without Jason Kelsey. Like, he was like the true captain of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Like, he's what makes it go. I mean, not to sell Jalen Hurts short. Of course, Jalen Hurts is what actually makes it go. But it's like the entire nature of the offense could change without like that bully ball, like all pro at the pivot. And I just wonder. I just don't know what we're really going to get without subtracting Kelsey and adding Kellen Moore. Kind of just adds up to instant identity crisis to me.
Well, I think that they had an identity crisis last year.
They did. They had a horrible identity crisis last year, yes.
So I don't know. Honestly, I don't know if it could get worse. It got really bleak for this team at the end of last year. I mean, they went into that playoff game and they said, we are going to do the exact same thing that we've been doing for 8 weeks, and it has not worked.
They knew
they
they
don't care. And they collapsed. They collapsed. The Bucs won that game easily, going away. So I don't really understand what the point of the end of the season was for the Eagles. I will say what you're saying about Jason Kelsey is that he will come out of retirement by Halloween.
Yeah. No, he easily. I mean, he gets on ESPN like 2 weeks. Like, oh man, I can't do this TV thing.
Yeah.
And then instantly back.
Although I have seen him enjoying himself with more than one beer, so I wonder if he'll be ready.
Listen, not everyone's imbibing less. Jason Kelsey will still have a beer. Lots
just
of people just one, of course. But yeah, I guess that's it for our show today. We're sorry for the technical difficulties. when you have the guests, sometimes things just go haywire. We hadn't had a haywire show in a while, and went haywire.
And thanks for those who stuck with us through the softball broken bone talk. I liked it. I was into it. I hope you were too.
I was spellbound. I hope you're spellbound. We're back with way more Rotoworld football show next week and way more mock drafts. We got 4 mock drafts coming at you.
So many
over the next 6 days. So it's gonna be awesome stuff. Check that out, including half PPR on Friday. Denny Carter, myself, Andy Behrens, and Ian Hartitz all taking part. It's gonna be really, really good stuff. So look out for that. Look out for a 0RB article coming from Denny. Look out for my article on the highest variance ADPs. Kyle Dvorak recapping the preseason every week. A lot of great stuff on rotoworld.com. So for Denny, I'm Pat. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week.